Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. It is an honor for me to be here at this event. And I'm glad to share a little experience of my work in the context of the National Museum of Ethnography and Folklore. In the museum, it was necessary to work on the practices. I had a project with 900 women weavers in the community where I wanted to understand the theory of the praxis, means how the practice of building an object is done. In the communities, the people who create these objects that are in the museum's collections understand in a more fluid way how to do that work, how the operational chain works. Because often in the museums, as collectors, we do not understand this operational chain. For the weavers, the craftswomen, the artists, in the different fields, the operational chain is so important. For example, obtaining the raw material, or the mutual breeding of the raw material, the treatment of the raw material, the processing of the object. And from this elaboration, we come directly to the topic of the chronology in archaeological, historical, and ethnographic terms. Thanks to this dynamic, we can also understand what the social life of the object is and its social interaction. That is why it is so important to understand the whole issue of the operational chains, to understand how the object is constructed, is built, and what are the terminologies of this operational chain. In linguistic terms, it's very important to understand the structure of these inputs, means what terminology is used for the mutual breeding, for example, in terms of the plants and the animals. Then the same goes for obtaining the raw material, for the techniques, what instruments are used to transform the raw material. In this sense, it has been very important to understand these logics of the linguistic entries in their own logic of the objects, whether it comes from Aymara, Quechua, Guarani, all the regional languages, so that we can understand the structure and proceed and flow in a different way. This construction of understanding the operational chain has automatically questioned us in the museum, like how the collections are organized. Often the collections are organized solely according to the criteria of conservation and preservation. And in terms of conservation and preservation, one can state that we only care and research about beauty, for example, what iconography and what color is used. And often we do not understand the logic of the operational chain. So for us, that logic proposes to the museum directly how to understand these approaches. When I entered the National Museum of Ethnography and Folklore, there were two very important collections: the collections of cultural goods and the collection of documents. And within these two collections, there was in the past not enough research to understand the dynamics of the collection management. So it was obvious to understand that the whole collections was really like screaming, I'm science, I'm technology, I'm identity, I'm culture, I'm economy. And that's like how the different single objects came out. And for this reason, it has been important to change the dynamics, even in terms of the structure of the discussion. Often we focus, for example, on the issue to understand the things about beauty, what means beauty, elegance, and what is preserved best. But on the other hand, we do not understand the operational chain of these specific inputs, which is very important, like, for example, how the raw material is processed and where it comes from, how it passes from one community to another, from one region to another. For example, the cotton traveling to the Altiplano, and from the Altiplano, how the fiber of the camelid travels to the valleys and the tropics. This helps us to understand the movements of trade in the raw materials involved in an object. then all these dynamics of movement makes us understand things completely differently, such as, for example, the transportation of clay from one region to another region for its processing, and then from that processing, the created object travels again to another region. Or the exchange means doing things in different regions and how to be able to understand the tradition and culture in the social life of the object itself, what role the object plays. And in that sense, it was very important to get into the dynamics of multidisciplinary understanding from social sciences. Anthropology, archaeology, linguistics, history, so that we have a more comprehensive information. For example, biology regarding of the specific subject of feathers. By analyzing the DNA, you know which bird it comes from, whether the bird was alive or dead. Then these dynamics change. Instead of putting responsibility only into one curatorship, you get a broad vision from various points of view. Thanks to this logic, we created those 500-page catalogs presenting our thoughts from the operational chain, the chronology, to the social life of the object in its interaction. These dynamics lead us to a self-questioning of the past trends of the academic studies of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, which often do not have the logic to understand, for example, the construction of the object. It's more like a specialization towards the beautiful, the cute, which very often is well known. This has been very important for us to understand this force field of an object construction from the linguistic structures for its translation. If it has been done in Aymara, for example, to pass it on to Spanish or another international language like English. These dynamics have made us question ourselves and enable us to overcome the gap between theory, because much research is done on the theoretical side, and the practical side, building a bridge of connectivity between both sides, which can work with the appropriate terminologies. In many cases, they are very separate. There is the practical part, which is only handled with practical language for those who do the practical work. And there is another academic language that is only built for the academics. So it's the language that separates us between theory and practice, which often have no connection. They're very separate, and we need to bring together these two sources of information, both theory and practice, so that we can have a more complete information and can improve our work in the future. So thanks to all that information, what we do is we build that bridge, both in the academic production and in the debate. For the debate, it is very important to have these international conferences where the theoretical side of the academics and to have also the complementary viewpoint of the practical part of the artisans and of the artists. And this complementary of both the producer and artist and academic side has been necessary to build this bridge so that we can have a better flow of understanding how, for example, the collections work from these both perspectives. And this helps us to make a dramatic change in the exhibitions themselves. For example, to be able to have a look, a perception of the three dimensions, not only from one dimension. In many cases, for example, the textile is fixed into a frame and placed against the wall. But this is not the important bit for the weavers, but rather to look at the obverse and the reverse, to understand the three-dimensionality. Then automatically the creatorship changes completely and makes us think in terms of the practice of the theory.